This presentation, titled Remote Audits, the Best Practices to Embrace and Pitfalls to Avoid, comes to us from Ernest Blanchard. Ernest is Technical Operations Manager and Product Manager for IATF 16949, as well as a doctoral learner at Grand Canyon University's College of Doctoral Studies in Business Administration. His current dissertation research includes risk-based thinking and risk management. He is also a trainer and an SGS lead auditor for EMS, quality, safety, and recycling standards. Ernest has more than 30 years of work experience in metals, plastics, automotive, and related industries, including environmental compliance, environmental monitoring, and resource management. This experience also includes 22 years of full-time third-party auditing. He has conducted management system audits across a variety of industry sectors. He joined SGS in 2008 after working in several auditing positions in the management systems certification field. Since 2012, Ernest has been a member of SGS's management team. He has been product manager for ISO 14001 and OSIS, in addition to his duties as a veto authority for IATF. Ernest is currently a senior member of ASQ and holds the Certified Quality Auditor and Certified Manager of Quality Organizational Excellence designations. And with that, take it away, Ernest.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Yeah, as we said, this is probably just go to the next page. Oh, next page, maybe. What's going on? There we go. And you can see this is a repeat of what we just talked about. So in this, this is taken, a lot of it's taken from one of our internal presentations. So this is a little bit about my company. It's just been around since 1878, and like I said, a little bit of a detail there. I don't want to get in much detail with that. So what we're going to do with the with this particular presentation is I wanted to give you a little bit of an agenda. So we'll look at the remote audit principles and some of the criteria related to that, some of the planning that has to happen, and steps for, and this is conducting, and I should probably got rid of this. This comes out of our IATF remote audits because of the fact that IATF is no particular about how they do the remote audits. So we presented this to them, to our clients, and this is, but remote auditing is remote auditing in some ways. How to prepare for a remote audit and key insights into the audit experience. So as I mentioned in the intro, I do a lot of different standards, but of course, ISO 9001 is one of the largest. And so wanted to get a little bit of a background when it comes to auditing, because when we look at this, we look at the systems, what we're trying to do is if you look at the, what 9001 is all about, using this standard to demonstrate the ability to provide products and services that meet customer and regulatory requirements. And you have these major, they call them standard language, the major clauses, and these clauses are all standardized now across, the different schemes, 14,001, 9,001, the newest updated one is 45,001, et cetera, including IATF. It includes the 9,001 requirements. So when you think about this, this is important to get as a foundation, because we're going to be doing the remote audits rather than doing them in person, and we have to understand what the reason for doing audits. What we're looking at is a remote audit is really, it's conducted in the same manner as on-site, but it uses electronic methods such as video conferencing or remotely obtain evidence and evaluate it in order to determine the extent of conformity to the audit criteria. So in this case, it would depend on the scheme. If we're talking about 9001 or an industry-specific standard like IATF, it's really going to be looking at trying to gather enough evidence to show whether or not the audit, or excuse me, the client, the auditee, conforms to the criteria. So the remote audit is one that will be conducted completely offsite using a mobile or desktop application. And this is wording that was found in the mandatory documents that we use. It's called ICT, or Internet Communications Technology. This limits the physical contact between the auditor and the key personnel. And of course, the audit will be fully remote the audit plan will address the scope of the remote audit. So what we're saying is that when we do a remote audit, we still need to have access to the personnel that are responsible to perform the audit and to be interviewed. They need to be available within their parts of the audit, whether they're leadership or whether it's somebody that's part of operations. They need to be available. The top management needs to be available when they are part of and going to be interviewed according to the audit plan. I guess that's the way to say it. So it allows the clients to maintain their certificates during this whole issues with the pandemic and social distancing, and even though we're largely past that, I thought it was very important to have this subject talked about, because we don't know how long the remote audits will be. Right now, I have remote audits on my schedule throughout the rest of the year. And so I'm assuming that remote auditing may be here to stay, depending on what the needs are and restrictions there are for traveling and et cetera. So when you think about a remote audit, the remote audit, basically, there are almost any type of audit, or when you're in the audit cycle, can be considered a remote audit. The registrar usually will conduct the audit after they've done some type of evaluation of why are we asking for the audit, what's the criteria, what's the risk, and typically what is called as a risk assessment. And that might be, you may not even know it's been done, but typically what we do in our registrar is we ask the client to fill out a form, and then we do the evaluation and saying whether the audit can be a full or 100% remote audit or a partially remote audit. In other words, you may have somebody on site, and then somebody will be remotely calling in to do their part of the audit. That happens many times when you're dealing with part of the team being in a different part of a different country, a different part of the continent. I have to do that when I'm supporting somebody that's in Canada, and I was the remote person, and they had the on-site person was the lead auditor. He's the one that was there, but I was able to do the audit, so it was considered a partial remote. And of course, you can do manufacturing. I've done engineering firms that are support activities. Of course, in the IATF world, we have to do remote support locations, have to be done separately. And I do those, and those are primarily going to be sales, purchasing, offices, or things like design centers and testing centers. And of course, where you're at in the audit cycle, that makes a difference as well. Earlier this year, I did an audit that was basically two parts, because it was a stage 1 and stage 2 audit. And now, depending on the scheme, you may end up having an impact for the next year's audit, depending on whether it was a stage 2 audit or surveillance. Many of our surveillance audits, especially with 9001, I won't say this year, but when they first started doing them last year, many of them didn't include production at all, because the production was very little. And in some instances, whole lines were shut down. Maybe only a third of the plant was working. So what we allowed was that if it was during a surveillance audit, and we've already done in the cycle, already looked at manufacturing, we were allowed to not do the manufacturing that particular time for that surveillance audit. Now this year, a lot of the audits are what they call a recertification, or at the end of the cycle, and everything has to be done, all the processes, in order to maintain that, and they get a new certificate. So, and then in some instances, you can do remote audits internally, and that's the part that I wanted to talk about as well, because this would depend on the complexity of the organization, how many sites they may have, etc. So, but if you have multiple sites and you want to be able to do the internal audit, you can do that remotely. Say a corporate person could do an audit, call in and do the audit remotely, or you could have, normally if you have some cross-functional teams doing audits, like one plant auditing another, they can do that remotely as well. As long as it's properly maintained and proper trained, you can do that. One of the things that I wanted to bring out too is that while remote auditing has become a mode basically for a lot of registrars, maybe the majority of audits are still being done remotely because of the variants for the COVID-19, et cetera, and the difficulty with traveling internationally. There are some requirements, and we have to make sure that we meet those. And it's important for our clients to know what they are as well. So we have a couple of mandatory documents. These are documents that are put out by the International Accreditation Forum, the IAF. They are the top of the pyramid, if you will, when it comes to accreditation standards, accreditation processes. And what they say in MD12, that might be a typographical error, I apologize. And under the principles for remote assessment, it says the remote assessment can be utilized instead of conducting on-site assessments, provided the outcomes of such assessments are equivalent to those of the on-site assessments. And I wanted to read that specifically because that's really important. You have to be able to draw the same conclusions. You have to be able to judge as an audit team, do you continue to meet the intended outcomes for a particular standard, whether that be in 9001 or whether it be one of the other standards like environmental or health and safety, 14,000, 45,001, or even a different industry specific standard like aerospace. You have to be able to show that you'd have equivalent outcomes. The other part of it is this isn't really anything in particular here. It talks about use of the internet communication technology for auditing assessments. But I just wanted to point out that both of these documents, mandatory documents, both of them have been in place for years before the pandemic ever hit. While it was difficult to get them approved or to really, feel like we needed to, or that they were appropriate types of auditing, they were there. They were there as possibilities. That's one of the reasons, and I can't speak for other registrars, but SGS went from doing basically 0 remote audits to doing 100% remote audits like in 3 weeks. All we had to do was implement these mandatory documents. We had to put in a procedure, we had to put in a risk assessment process, and our global technical people out of Switzerland were able to help us with that. And we were able to move swiftly from being able to not being able to do audits because nobody was letting anybody travel or visit their sites to be able to do 100% of our audits. So we were able to keep up and maintain the certifications for all of our clients with very, very few exceptions. So when we talk about the criteria, of course, we want to talk about that risk assessment. That allows the registrar to really identify whether something is able to be audited, that there's proper reasons for that, whether there's an outbreak or whether there's just a lack of being able to have visitors. And in the internal audits and the second party audits, they should also have a criteria for when you can conduct the audit remotely. And that will vary, of course, depending on the circumstances, depending on what the standard is and the availability of resources, I would assume. So here's some of the things about the remote audit planning that needs to be considered. When you look at this, you have to remember that equivalency requirement we found in the mandatory document. We have to make sure that if we have an audit, and I can speak from a third-party standpoint, my audit plans, if you look at an audit plan for a remote audit or an audit plan for one that's considered to be on-site, they're virtually the same. There's going to be some slight differences because we got to take in consideration the fact that we're doing this with internet communication technology. But other than that, we're doing a process audit and we're doing a process approach to the audit. So the difference, of course, is that we need to use a software platform, and that should be determined ahead of time. Sometimes one difficulty I ran into is when somebody makes a change and they changed from, I forget what it was, it's called intermedia, I think, or something like that, being that they were working a lot with the government, one of the engineering firms I talked about, and they switched to Microsoft Teams like a week before the audit. And that was a good thing, but also was a bad thing because they really weren't familiar with Microsoft Teams. And if you're familiar with Teams, one of the problems you run into with Microsoft Teams is that sharing the screen can be a little clunky, I call it. The problem with screen sharing with Microsoft Teams, and this is just my personal opinion, I haven't done any research on it, is the fact that you have the ability to share you can share a screen, you can share an app, you can share a lot of different things like a document. And people forget that they need to, when they switch from one document to another, they got to stop sharing and then resharing. So it gets a little bit crazy. It's not that big of an issue, but it can cause some, I would say, problems, if you will. So that's what we want to just make sure that you have that planned out ahead of time. Again, not familiar with other registrars, but I know in my case, I virtually have used like 5 or 6 different platforms. And what we normally, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but what we normally recommend is that the clients host the meeting so they know who to interview, who to bring into the interview. And either they have like a series of meetings or they have one long one and they keep inviting them for a certain period of time. So it's up to them. But because you do that, we have to be able to, as the registrar, as the auditor, we have to be able to participate, whether it's Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Google Meet or Google Hangout, or even sometimes we're even using FaceTime. So, you know, we have to be able to do that. And that's part of the planning process to make sure that we're in that, we're all working at the same platform and everything can work properly. And then the other thing we have to consider is maybe the age of the building and the configuration of the building. Sometimes buildings are pretty small and the, you know, signal for the Wi-Fi or internet can basically have no problem permeating the entire building. Others, the buildings are 80, 90 years old, made out of steel. They're basically Faraday cages. And you almost, once you step outside of the office area, you're not going to have signal. So you have to plan properly for that. And so then, of course, you also have to think about what's going to happen if there's any kind of a power outage. And that's also on the part of the auditor too, because the auditor, once in a while, the auditor might have a power outage, or they may have not a power outage, but an outage in their internet. And then they have to make sure that they have alternate means to be able to complete the audit, of course. So here's the thing that this is really the most important part of the presentation. It's really, what do we do for the best practices? And this is obviously could be a long list of things, but if you have a certificate that you're maintaining and you've been doing this for a long time, then just remember, as I said earlier, the remote audit isn't that much different than a regular audit. The fact is that we're doing the same thing. We're doing the audits. We're working off the same kinds of audit plans. We haven't changed our documents. The plan is there. We got to write a report. There's some key differences, but you have to remember that the key here is just communication. Many auditors, such as myself, I'm auditing almost every day of the week. There might be a few days here and there where I don't have something. So we have to really communicate with our clients by way of email. Every once in a while, there might be something. If I'm working with a client that's over on the West Coast and have a later start, I can talk to somebody in the morning, but typically that's not the case. Usually if I'm going to talk to anybody as a conference call or anything like that, it has to be done after the audit day is done. So we got to make sure we're communicating. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask your auditor. They'll give you direction, or they'll check with their technical people and they will get back to you. We need to make sure that the meetings are set up ahead of time, and make sure that you're inviting the right person. In other words, I've had times when people have had multiple invites. So that gets a little bit crazy trying to manage all the different invites. I had times when people make one invitation and they communicate within their team, they communicate to them when they have to log on to the meeting. So both of those have their pluses and their minuses, their pros and cons, if you will. If you have a lot of meetings, you have to make sure that the people are getting the invites, that they've accepted the invitations, etc., and that they're going to be available during that time. So the one meeting, that becomes a little bit more difficult because typically we're going to be, the auditor will be on that same meeting the entire time, and then the people that have to access, I have to have access to that particular invitation. So they both have their advantages. And I would say that for my personal preference, I've been doing remote audits since March, April of last year. And I continue to do them. I did one earlier this week, and I'll be doing the entire next week. The entire week will be remote audits. I think that probably having one meeting is good, especially if you only have one auditor doing the audit. But if you have a team, then individual meetings might be best, because you already have to have more than one invite for having more than one auditor, right? So this is where we talk about the next bullet point there, is each auditor on the team should have their own invitation. Now, there are the unique times when that may not be possible, or I won't say necessary, but maybe possible. If you're in a really small organization and you only have like one or two people involved in the management systems, then obviously there's going to be a good portion of that audit where the team may have to be together, dealing with the internal audits or the corrective actions or talking to leadership, that kind of thing. But when we get out into the operational side of things, or dealing with the individual, like purchasing compared to sales, compared to customer service, design, engineering, then probably going to have separate meetings for that. But I think that'll be a case-by-case basis as well. But I think most of the audit teams would prefer to each have their own audit path, if you will, their own meetings to go down. And of course, we'd have the organization's personnel should be lined up, based on the plan. The plan will be sent out ahead of time. But honestly, the way that the pandemic has hit people and the amount of things going on, I will say that there are times when our audits don't even get confirmed until like a week or a week and a half before the audit time. Normally, that's not the case. Normally, we have our audits confirmed months in advance. And so it means you may get your published audit plan a little bit later or closer to the time of the audit than normal. But if you get that ahead of time, then look at the subjects, the processes that will be covered, who should be involved, and set up your invitations appropriately, and make sure that we have that set up ahead of time. One of the difficulties, now I will say this, is that doing remote audits, the auditors do have to be a little bit more flexible and patient, because there are going to be times when there's difficulties. There's going to be times when there's like a power outage or difficulties with the bandwidth, the audio locks up. Typically, that means all you got to do is walk to another part of the plant, and you'll end up getting better signal. But sometimes it becomes a permanent thing, and you got to log off, log back on, and all that type of thing. And we have to make sure that we are working in a system that we can, if we don't have clear video, then we have to make sure as auditors that we're communicating that to you as the auditee, because a lot of times they don't know, because they're there, physically looking at things and they can see it, but they don't know that we can't see it, right? So that communication, it should be a two-way street. So if you're going to do audits, if you're performing audits, then you need to make sure you communicate not only if you're having bandwidth issues, but also letting them know what you need to see. Like if you can't see something, can you move the camera this way or that way? Can you zoom in a little bit? Can you move the camera in? Those types of things. Directing them so you can get the evidence, the observed things, see or get maybe even a screenshot if you're working off of, like, say, a tablet yourself, and you can get a good quick screenshot. So then you can have it for your note-taking purposes for later. All right, some of the things that we don't want to do, or I've seen over the past months and years, is a lack of communication. Every once in a while, I will be, to this day, I'll still be a part of an audit where the audit starts at 8 o'clock, and at 7 o'clock in the morning, I don't have an invite. And if I don't have an invite, then guess what's going to happen? I can't access any kind of a video feed, and we can't do the audit. Now, sometimes that means maybe they sent it to the wrong email. Maybe there was a last-minute change to the audit team. Maybe there are times when people change jobs, and maybe we sent our information to the wrong person, or a person that's no longer at that plant or that location. So there's a lot of reasons for it, but it becomes something that if you have all the information you need ahead of time, you need to make sure you're communicating with your team, with the audit team, and if you need to send out that invite, you need to send it out sooner rather than later. So that way everything can be set up ahead of time, so you're not scrambling that first day. That's one of the worst ways to start an audit, is to scramble trying to get everybody on the audit and getting all the invites sent out, because not only you're sending them not only to the audit team, but you're sending them to your own people, to the own resources that need to be part of the audit. So everybody's like scrambling, and usually it takes at least a day to get it all straightened out. And then, this is where it can be inefficient. Maybe not, but a lot of times it is. If we're trying to do the audit, that's not a good thing. In other words, what I mean by that, if we're having to host the Microsoft Teams meeting or Zoom or whatever, I don't know your team. I don't know who to send the invites to. I don't know a lot of things. And the problem with that is that it works well for when if I'm doing a pre-audit meeting and I'm talking to somebody and I can send the invite out, that's no problem. It's like a conference call. But the audit has so many parts to it, so many moving parts, that it just doesn't work very well. And that's one of the worst things that you run into, and you have to be sending out the invite. I do that during an audit, like when I'm having my auditor caucuses or we're meeting with each other, we're talking. We do that quite often, but not necessarily during the audit itself. Okay. And then, again, when we're trying to work from one meeting invite, that sometimes works, but a lot of times that's not as good, because again, if that person doesn't have the actual invite, or the invitation is not working, etc., or sometimes, I'm not sure that's the case with a lot of places, but if your account where you set up, if you only have a certain number of participants, that kind of thing. So also, when we talk about the planning of the audit, if we're having to hunt down somebody to give them an invite, and then they say we're not available, we got meetings, we got whatever, that becomes delays. And of course, remember that equivalency thing. We got to make sure that a remote audit can give us the same results as one that would happen on site. And sometimes that leads to a lot of frustration, and a lot of delays means that there might be a lack of objective evidence that actually has been obtained. And depending on the audit and how it's working and whatever, that could actually be something where we might have to raise a nonconformance due to lack of resources or otherwise lack of support for the audit. It's not something that we do very often, but it is a possibility. And then, of course, when we have the insufficient bandwidth, parts of the audit, parts of the facility, that really should be taken care of or looked at prior to the audit. Many of our folks, when they first started doing remote audits, they don't do it every year, but when they started, they would actually test it. They would go out with a handheld device, whether it's a phone or a tablet or sometimes even their laptop, and just kind of walk around some of the areas where they think we might be. When we're doing 14,001, sometimes we have to go outside. We have to go into recycling centers where the waste is held, maybe even going in sometimes into hazardous waste areas, which we're not supposed to have cell phones. So sometimes you have to set up a system where you're taking pictures, and then you have to get additional evidence other than just pictures to be able to audit it properly. And then, of course, in that times when there are areas where you definitely don't have any kind of signal, then of course you have to set up a system where you usually would be taking pictures. And I would tell somebody what I need. I need to see a picture of the final inspection area. I need to see a picture of any of the postings, any kind of quality alerts, et cetera. I give them some direction. And then in conjunction with that, if there's a quality record on the line, I would ask them to either take a picture of it or to scan it so we can then discuss it. And then if we need to go back to the, follow up and go back to the line. So as you can see, that part of it would be a much more complex process. Now, is it also true that sometimes it's unavoidable? As I said, I've come to the conclusion over the past year and a half that not every manufacturing plant was designed with Wi-Fi in mind. Some of those, the more modern plants have Wi-Fi connecting their machinery back to engineering so they can do live monitoring, but that's not the case very often. In some places you go to that are foundries or other places that, the building's been there for, longer than a century. I was at one place many years ago that was actually basically the oldest continuous manufacturing concern in North America. So obviously their building is not quite that old. It's not from the 1700s, but it was a very old building, and I doubt whether Wi-Fi would work there very much. Okay, so we alluded to this a little bit, but there are some things we can do to try to get rid of those concerns, try to make it go a lot better than you would think it would. So prior to the audit, we should have a meeting scheduled to make sure that the ICT is compatible between the auditor and the auditee. That could be like a 10-minute meeting. What I mean by that, we basically use the internet to make sure that we're able to communicate, see each other's screens. A lot of times we are using the video, but many times I'm not, especially when I'm out, when I know the bandwidth's going to be a little short or not very broad, if you will, but we won't have a lot when we're out in the manufacturing plant. So I don't usually turn on my my video to try to help with the bandwidth issues there might be. And then if possible, we want to make sure that there's a short meeting prior to the opening meeting or the first part of your audit on that same audit day. Usually, again, about 15 minutes before you can log in. And I've had this issue. I had a couple times where I couldn't get my Microsoft Teams to work properly. I had to restart my computer. And the same thing with the auditee or the client that I have. They may have had issues, so we have to kind of work through that before the opening meeting, before the start of the audit. And one thing that became apparent after we started doing audits is we have to be aware that confidentiality is important. So I would recommend to anybody, if you have anything that is got any confidential or really sensitive information, like of course, anything to do with HR, when you're dealing with somebody's personal data, or if you're dealing with sales numbers or dealing with business planning and you may have financials involved there, then of course, as the auditor, I would take notes, but I wouldn't keep any of those records. And I wouldn't take any screenshots of those types of records, right? But there are going to be times when I need the record. Remember, we talked about when I have to scan the inspection sheet, or I got to scan, or I got to have you send me a copy of a procedure that I normally would see in the conference room, but I can't see it because I'm not there, so I have to have a copy of it. And those are above and beyond showing it on the screen. And so I may have your documents. So you have to take consideration for that. If you have a laptop that has BitLocker, installed, then you should be okay. Because even if somebody takes it, that hard drive is encrypted. But also you got to remember there's going to be times when you're going to have that documentation, you're working with it and stuff. So you want to make sure that you maintain the confidentiality of that document. What I normally tell my my clients is I keep the information for purposes of just making sure that when they go through our technical review of the audits, if there's any questions, I can refer back to my notes. But I do try to purge out any documentation from my hard drive after the audit or after the technical review, depending on where we're at, if we need like a certificate issue, that kind of thing. Okay, so you just got to remember that confidentiality is a little bit more difficult when it comes to a remote audit. You have to be aware of that. Okay, so again, prior to the open meeting, we go through and we make sure that we keep track, just like we do in a regular meeting, of the attendees of the opening and closing meeting. And we make sure that either you keep that as the client, or we do that ourselves, depending on how we have set that up ahead of time. And then again, one of the things that we have to be really, really aware of is this is an audit, but it's not the same type of audit as what we had in the past. So we have to be really flexible. You know, there are times when, you know, when you've been on site and things go really, really smoothly for many years, but then all of a sudden we're trying to do this remotely and it's just not working very well. So there are going to be unexpected circumstances. So you have to kind of expect the unexpected. We have to make sure that, you know, if I lose connection, and that's happened in the past, I have to have alternate ways of dealing with these issues. If there's issues that are like present in the plant, if you're dealing with an area where everybody has to wear hearing protection because there's such the noise level is where it's at, and it's very common. So you have to be able to be flexible. You may have to, if they don't have a good headset, they may have a hard time hearing you. So you may have to have, you know, when for time to time, have them move into an office adjacent to the production floor so that you can communicate better and give them direction. Or you may have to have a situation where if they do have a good, you know, noise canceling headset, they can hear you. They may have to relay the question to the operator or to the employee, the associate. So you're looking to make sure that those details are accurate. Many times it's not just audio, right? So you do see, sometimes you're seeing what's going on. So that's a good cue during an audit. So I don't necessarily have to hear every single word, but I know what he's talking about. I can see, you know, I can see the gauge center. I can see the equipment. I know what he's talking about. So I know the context, right? So it makes it easier to fill in the blanks when it comes to the audio side of things. And then, you know, one of the things we want to talk about is the different types of communication activity. We have, of course, the web conferencing. You can use the client systems. That's not as popular as it used to be. Or in the worst case scenario, of course, would be going back to using your phone and having them either, if it's something where the audio is just not working, you have to use the phone for audio and you still see the video, then they can still show their documents, or they have to send everything to you. You know, again, trying to get this audit done and making sure it's the same level of evaluation as a normal audit. So they send it to you, and then you can either keep them on the phone and ask questions as you go, or you take time to review and get back with them. So this is something that you have to be concerned with. But I would think that the majority of the audits I've done were using the web conferencing, whether that's Skype or, you know, Skype for Business nowadays, or Microsoft Teams, or whether it's any of the other ones like Google Meet or Zoom or whatever. Those are the ones that are the more common, but you have to make sure that you have some contingency plans in place in case something happens. You know, bad weather goes through and you lose power, you know, that kind of thing. All right, so the key to getting ready with a remote audit is, you know, again, the personnel. Make sure the personnel are available. They're available during their assigned times. Now, some people have to be available throughout, whether they're if it's a quality audit, then a quality manager. Environmental health and safety, same thing. The management team has to be available. But other than that, you just have to have the people available during the time that they're assigned. Again, availability, and depending on where you're at in your audit cycle, you may not have to go throughout the entire site, but like when you're dealing with, again, as you tell from the opening meeting, I do a lot of automotive audits. I live in West Michigan. Okay, so my background since 1991 has been part of the automotive industry. So I do a lot of that, and their requirements are that you not only cover the production, but you spend 1/3 of the audit doing that, and you have to make sure you cover all the shifts. So I definitely have to do for them. But when I'm doing the 9001 or the 14001, I have a lot less of those type of requirements. If I'm doing a surveillance audit, I may or may not have to do the production side. So I wouldn't have to go there. But in some cases with the, if you're doing a full systems audit, you not only have to go there, but you have to go maybe to an adjacent building because that's where they store their waste or that kind of thing. So we have to make sure that that tour is planned properly and that we have the available technology. And then of course, documentation, as I said, sometimes it has to be emailed to us. And if we email that, then we got to make sure that that's done properly. Typically, I just tell people if you don't want to email it to me, then let's just put it up on the screen and we'll take a look at it and we'll talk about it. And that's part of the objective evidence. And the same thing with either records or documentation or procedures. And then a lot of times you also have not only documentation you have to worry about, but also the interview process. But that's a different step of thing. And then the last thing we have to really worry about, of course, is that internet connection. We talked about that. We got to make sure that we test it ahead of time and that we're familiar with it enough so that we know the functionalities so we can make sure that we're able to share screen as we need to, or invite somebody, or if we need to, or make sure if there's more than one person on there that they can, all be able to participate. All right, so here's some of the things that we've heard, and this is very generic, but one of the things that we need to make sure is that many times, probably more times than not, we're going to be using all of these. We're going to be using webcams, we're going to use teleconference, screen sharing, emails will be sent. Sometimes people even share it through MS Teams. They can share their documents. Sometimes I've seen where they've actually had me, they had their documents loaded up into MS Teams, and I was able to access their documents during the audit without them even sending them to me. I had access to the file folders. But one of the things that that's really a pro. So for doing it, one of the things that we have that are a problem is that a lot of times when we are trying to do this audit, again, especially in the production areas outside of the offices, it's very difficult to do the interview. And I know that really bothers some auditors because every auditor is a little different. Some auditors, they want, if you have 100 people in your plant, they don't feel like they've done enough unless they've talked to 95, right? Others talk to the individuals, but they focus in on the processes, the documentation, the process controls, and those types of things, and include the interviewees as necessary. That's more my style. So I don't get impacted as much as some of the others when there's a lack of interviews, but the people are definitely part of the system and they need to be audited. So that could be a problem. And then of course, if you have a problem with your software, either whether that's a user error or if there's a technical infrastructure problems, then we have to make sure that we are taking that into consideration. I have been fortunate so far that I've not seen a lot of times when there's been interruptions in the technology or even in the power. There was one instance I remember where we had some issue, and I almost called the audit off for that day and added it to another day or something because it wasn't that the offices lost power, but the plant lost power. They seemed like they were on two different substations, even though they were right next to each other, right? They didn't share the same building, but they were like on the same lot. They were across the street from each other or adjacent parking lots. So for some reason, the offices had power, but the plant didn't. So what we had to do is we had to rearrange the audit plan. And later on that day, the power did come back up to the plant. So was kind of a moot point, but it was something that was, for a minute there, was almost the point where we had to call the audit off for that day and start it over the next day. Not canceling the audit, but just making a big time change to that. Okay, so here are some of the things that people talk about. What do you need to start a remote audit? Well, I would check with whether you are working with a certification body, registrar, if you will. Are you working with a client, a customer? Check with a third-party audit. According to the mandatory documents, you would need to assess the risk and justify why we're doing the remote audit. And again, that you can make sure that it's equivalent to a on-site audit. And then if the remote audit, doesn't cover everything, that's typically, not going to happen at a stage 1 and stage 2, because in order to be able to do those, you have, and qualify and meet the outcome requirements for the accreditation bodies, the oversight bodies, then you're going to need to cover everything. If it doesn't, then that means that might impact the audit to the point where you have to extend the audit, or maybe, come back and do the rest of the audit later. If you can't, there's something that just can't be done remotely, then that should be part of the risk assessment that's done to see if you can even do, because that's remember we talked about a full or partial remote audit. I would think if there's parts of your audit that can't be done remotely, then you would have to do them on site, and that would be a partial remote audit. And again, if the internet connection fails, the rule of thumb is that you have to have a backup. If you have your internet connection fails, then somebody should have a phone, a mobile internet connection, where you could then connect your devices to that. Now that's going to be limited. It might be limited because maybe the server is not accessible, etc. But at least the audit can continue. And again, that goes back to the flexibility side of things. And here's one, I think we talked about it a little bit, but I wanted to excuse me, point it out. If your staff is working from home and your production isn't happening, then the key thing is that we can still do the audit. We just have to make sure that future audits would cover the production as it occurs. Okay. Again, that would depend on where you're at in your audit cycle. If you're in a recertification, you might have to reschedule that audit. Even if it goes beyond your normal time frame, typically that's okay as long as there is either a concession or a waiver. Again, that would depend on your scheme that you're working under to exceed the time because of pandemic, because of lack of production. Nowadays, it's not just the pandemic that's causing problems, but also the supply chain issues, that chip shortage. So it may not always be that you're doing a remote audit or you're having impacts to audits based on the pandemic, but also some of the consequences of the pandemic. And so you would be able to do the audit, but you would have to make sure that the next surveillance or at the recertification or whatever the next audit is, that you take up the slack and do the production. So, but that would be something you would really have to communicate to your registrar, to your certification body, to make sure they know and they can plan properly. Okay, but it can be done if the production is not being done, but you would just have to make sure you cover that in future audits. All right. Okay, I'm not sure how they're going to handle the questions. That'll be up to Mike, but I think you guys should have some way of being able to send questions. But of course, here's my contact information. You watch this, you have additional questions, additional concerns, feel free to reach out. Okay, thank you for watching.
And thank you, Ernest Blanchard, for your perspective on remote auditing best practices. And that will conclude this presentation.
All right.